47 minutes remaining.
Ladies and gentlemen, shortly after murdering her daughter and placing her lifeless body in the dirt behind their home, Brooke Richardson sent 2 elated text messages to her mother that both contain the phrase, "My belly is back. My belly is back." Ladies and gentlemen, that belly was her child. That belly was her daughter, a daughter with fingers and toes, with hair on her head. A child that she tossed into the dirt and didn't even have the decency to wrap her in a blanket to show at least some semblance of respect for that baby girl. A child that meant absolutely nothing to her, as evidenced by her text message just hours later. I'm literally speechless with how happy I am. This photo of Brooke was taken the same day that her daughter died. The same day. So it's easy for her now to come in here and portray herself as someone that loved her daughter and would never hurt her daughter. But we know that that is absolutely not the truth. And we know that because of her statements and her actions before her daughter's death and afterwards. Let's first talk about some of the defense arguments that have been put out in this case. And one of them, they didn't discuss it here in closing arguments, but it's a theme they've tried to weave in, which is she had 10 weeks. She thought she had 10 weeks to tell everyone about what was going on. But we know that's not true, don't we? When she was specifically asked in her first interview about how far along she was, she said she had no clue. She stated, "I'll be completely honest. I didn't listen. I didn't hear." And when asked again, Brooke stated, "I don't know how many weeks I was." And when she was asked, could they have told you maybe 32 weeks? She said, "Maybe. I know that I was far along." So to come in here now and suggest she thought she had 10 full weeks to tell everyone what was going on, that's completely inconsistent with the facts that we know in this case. And remember, our statements are not evidence. The evidence comes from the witness stand and the evidence that's presented. And there has been no evidence to suggest that she thought she had 10 weeks to finally come clean and tell everyone. And if she were going to come clean, what better time than a couple of days after the appointment when her mother gets the email from Hilltop OBGYN that says that she's pregnant? And her mom specifically asks her, "What's this mean? Are you pregnant?" She knew she was pregnant at that time. She knew she was far along. Don't you think if you were going to come clean, if you were going to tell somebody at the point that your mother's specifically asking about it and you know that it's going to happen, that's when you would talk about it if you were ever going to do that? Another argument that the defense makes is that Brooke's daughter was IUGR and was subsequently a stillbirth. There are numerous flaws with this argument, ladies and gentlemen. First, the diagnosis of IUGR was purportedly made based on one measurement in time, just from that April 26th visit with Dr. Andrew. But as you heard, the only way that you can diagnose IUGR is to have multiple measurements over a lengthy period of time so that you can track the baby's growth. With just one measurement, you have nothing to compare it to, so you don't know whether there's a lag in the baby's growth or not. And that's not coming from me. That's coming from Dr. Brady. the maternal fetal medicine specialist, the specialist that Dr. White, their doctor, sends his patients to consult with if they're a high-risk pregnancy. That's what Dr. Brady told you. And he told you from the information that we had, you can't diagnose IUGR, and you can't say that this child was a stillbirth. In fact, he told you that given her blood work and the information that he reviewed, he would expect that child to still be healthy 2 weeks later at the time that Brooke delivered. It's also interesting in this case that their doctor, Dr. White, issued 2 separate reports. If you remember, the first report said likely complicated by IUGR and significant likelihood of stillbirth with a conception date of August 21st, 2016. But apparently that wasn't good enough for defense counsel, because less than 2 months later, all of a sudden here comes another report. And this report's a lot more specific. This says definitely stillbirth and definitely IUGR. And now the conception is back in July, when both Brooke and Trey agree they weren't even seeing each other at that time. They didn't have sex until the middle of August. And this is the same doctor who came in here and told you that one of the really significant factors for him in reaching this stillbirth conclusion was how she described the child as really white. Do you all remember when he said that? It's like, oh, it was really white. And she wouldn't have known that. So this really white, that was really significant to me. But that's not what Brooke said. Fortunately, we have the interview. And you're going to have both interviews back there. The only time that Brooke was ever asked about what color the baby was she says, white, I think. And they follow it up. Like, what about her fingers or toes? Did you see any of that? Like, what color was that? I don't remember. This is what we're basing a stillbirth diagnosis from? White, I think? Are you kidding me? Again, you have to look at people's credibility. You have to assess their qualifications. Dr. White is a general OBGYN who says that on his second go-around, second report to defense counsel, he can say this baby is a stillbirth. And you have Dr. Brady, a maternal fetal medicine specialist, who says that that diagnosis of IUGR cannot be made based on the information that both doctors reviewed. And finally, the last point I want to make about this IUGR is that the only person who ever saw this child after she came out of the womb was Brooke Richardson. She's the only person that ever saw this child. And this is someone who worked in child watch, and someone who has watched 6-week-old babies of all sizes, big, medium, small. And how did she describe the size of her own baby? If you remember, she even sounded a little bit surprised when she was asked about it. When she was asked about the size of the baby, she said she was kind of big. But what did Dr. White say about that statement? He said that he didn't really give any weight to that statement. Why? She has experience working with babies. Even Brooke, with no medical experience whatsoever, knows whether a baby is big or not. And the funny thing is, when most people see a baby, when they look at them, a new infant, what do they always say? What's the common reaction? Oh, they're so small, they're so tiny. Not Brooke. She was kind of big. But the doctor discounted that statement from the only person that ever saw the baby alive. And you want to know why he discounted it? Because it didn't fit their narrative. It's hard to come in here and say that this was an extremely small IUGR baby if the baby is kind of big. But he was willing to give weight to all of the other descriptors that Brooke was willing to give about signs of life or a lack of signs of life. And he was willing to come in here and accept Brooke's diagnosis that this child was a stillborn, but not rely on her statements about whether the child was big. Again, this doctor simply discounted the things that didn't fit their narrative and only tried to latch on to the things that did. That's not reliable. That's not to any reasonable degree of medical certainty. And Dr. Brady, the maternal fetal medicine specialist, called him out on it. Another argument is that this case is the result of a false confession. And they even brought a false confession expert in here to tell you about techniques that can lead to false confessions. But what did he really have to say? He said, when you're looking at a statement, you evaluate it with all of the other circumstances surrounding the crime. That's just telling you to use your common sense, ladies and gentlemen. And when you view the statements made by the defendant in the context of the other information that we know, that she didn't want her child, that she looked for ways to get rid of her child, that she disposed of her child in the backyard without telling anyone, there's no question that her child was born alive in the early morning hours of May 7th. Another big argument from the state or from the defense is the state's expert got it wrong about the charring of the bones of the infant. First, this anthropologist wasn't one of the state's experts. She was hired by the coroner's office. And the coroner's office is not even affiliated with the state. And she did get it wrong about whether there was evidence of burning on the bones. But the state never hid that fact. As you saw, that was provided to defense counsel. And then additionally, the state went out and retained their own expert to get an objective opinion. And that report was turned over to defense counsel. And then we actually called her to the stand so that you could see her testify. And when she was called to the stand, she said the same thing as all the other experts. There was no evidence of charring to the bones. That doesn't mean that there wasn't some evidence of burning to the tissue, and that because of Brooke's deliberate actions of burying the baby in the yard, we can't say anything with respect to a medical or scientific cause of death. That's what all of them have said. So you have to look at other circumstances. They also want to talk about that the anthropologist says there's no identifiable trauma to these bones before the baby died. But again, that conveniently leaves out that she also told you, just from looking at the remains, which is all we were left with, you can't say if a child was drowned. You can't say if a child was suffocated. No one was alleging that this child's skull was smashed in. Rather, the most obvious cause of death here would be drowning or suffocation in order to silence the baby as soon as she came out. There's a suggestion here that there's reasonable doubt due to the lack of scientific or medical evidence. The reason that there's no exact medical or scientific cause of death is because of the deliberate actions of the defendant. The defendant's entire purpose of concealing her daughter and burying her in the backyard without telling anyone was so that no one would ever be able to run a test on that child. That was her purpose. So now to come in here and ask to be rewarded for that fact, to be rewarded for the fact that she was able to conceal that child for 2 months in the ground, that's unbelievable. So if you're back there in the jury room having discussions about the medical and scientific evidence regarding the cause of death, remember why you don't have that evidence. Remember who's responsible for that. It's not the state of Ohio.
Objection, Your Honor. He's
Overruled.
It's the defendant. Ms. Richardson. And you'll get an instruction from the court. It's called a consciousness of guilt instruction. And if you find that she concealed this evidence to hide evidence of the crime that she committed, you're allowed to consider that when making a determination about her guilt or not. So as we talked about in voir dire, you have to look at all the surrounding circumstances. And all of the surrounding circumstances and her actions point to this child being alive. Now let's talk about their expert psychologist, Dr. Bassman, who testified yesterday. In his first assessment that he did with Brooke, the assessment concluded that her primary concern in terms of her intense fear of rejection and disapproval and abandonment was related to her family. That assessment was based on the self-reporting by Ms. Richardson. But did you notice in the report that he tried to submit to the court and he tried to give to all of us? He changed that, didn't he? He changed the language from family to authority figures. And he tried to say that this fear of rejection and disapproval was so significant that she would just agree to whatever law enforcement was saying to her because she was so afraid. But we know again that this assessment and her fear were with respect to her own family. So you have to ask yourself, why did he make that change and come in here and try to suggest to you that it related to authority figures when he knew, they knew, that it related to her fear from her mother and Brandon? And this wasn't just a regular fear. The doctor says that she had an intense fear of abandonment, disapproval, and rejection by her mother and by Brandon, the two people that mattered the most to her. And I have to tell you, I absolutely agree with that. I do believe she had an intense fear regarding that. And because of that fear, she would engage in extreme behavior if she was under a significant amount of stress. And we know she was under stress at that point. She was pregnant by a boy that she wanted nothing to do with. She was terrified of losing Brandon. And she was so fearful of her mom's disappointment in her if she were in fact pregnant. Her stress was through the roof. And as a result, she engaged in extreme behavior due to her fears of being rejected and abandoned by the two people that mattered most to her. And that fear of disapproval, that relates to all of the character witnesses that came in here as well. They all told you that she had this image of having the perfect life. Only Brooke knew that at that time, her walls were crumbling around her. And because she wasn't willing to risk losing that perfect image, she engaged in extreme behavior, just as Dr. Bassman said that she would. Finally, what else did we discuss with Dr. Bassman's testimony? There was discussion about the fact that he didn't even consider that she was displaying all of the traits of someone who commits neonaticide, which is the killing of an infant on the day of its birth by mothers who deny that they are pregnant and cause death by suffocation, drowning in the toilet, or strangulation. And he told you he was familiar with the author of that article, Dr. Resnick, and he was even familiar with the term neonaticide. And Ms. Kraft discussed all of the factors that go into play of a neonaticide killer. Younger, late-teen female, check. No psychotic symptoms or psychosis, check. No criminal history, check. No attempt at abortion, Check. No relationship with the father of the child. Check. Inability to reveal the pregnancy to her mother. Check. Child is an obstacle to parental goals. Check. Child not wanted. Check. Denial of pregnancy. Check. Gave birth alone, at home, with other family members present in the home. Check. And what did Dr. Bassman say when confronted with all these factors? He commented that it appeared to be an old article. And then he was shown a peer-reviewed, scholarly article from 2010 examining the 40-year history of neonaticide. And so you have to ask yourself, why didn't he take those factors into consideration when he was looking at her personality traits? So let's talk about the facts in this case that show that she murdered her child. As we've said all along, this case is based on circumstantial evidence. And if you remember from voir dire, there's a difference between direct evidence and circumstantial evidence. Direct evidence is an eyewitness to the crime, somebody who saw what happened and can take that witness stand and tell you, I saw Tommy hit Joey. That's direct evidence. Circumstantial evidence is when you look at all of the surrounding facts and you're able to infer the existence of another fact. In this case, there is no eyewitness that can tell you that they watched Brooke Richardson kill her daughter. She didn't tell anyone. She didn't wake anybody up. So this is a circumstantial case. But remember, direct evidence and circumstantial evidence are to be weighed equally. They carry the exact same weight. So you can't just go back into the jury room and say, I just want to look at one thing to tell me whether she killed her child or not. Because that's not how a circumstantial case works. You have to look at all of the surrounding factors when making your decision. You have to look at the entire picture. One of the best ways I like to look at circumstantial evidence is to compare it to a puzzle. When you're putting together all of the pieces of a puzzle, you can start to form the big picture even before that puzzle is formed, can't you? And even when you're getting close to having that puzzle put together, even if you're missing a couple of pieces of the puzzle, you're still able to determine what the picture is, what's being depicted in the image. That's the same concept as circumstantial evidence. From looking at all of the surrounding circumstances, are you able to conclude what happened in the case even if you do not have every single fact? And from looking at all of the circumstances, can you put the puzzle together? Can you make the picture? So let's look at this puzzle and see whether when we put all of the pieces together, you have a clear idea of what happened. What's the first pieces we're going to start with? What do we know right at the outset? We know that she didn't want the baby. We know that because it was an unwanted pregnancy. She only had a very brief relationship with Trey. She stopped talking to him, hadn't seen him since August. So that's one thing we know. We know she had an intense fear that her boyfriend Brandon would leave her because she was pregnant. And that's not me saying that. You know the best way to know what somebody's thinking, ladies and gentlemen? It's to look at their text messages, to see what's going on in their mind at the time. And what did she text Brandon after her secret was exposed? She said, I love you. I'm so sorry that I never told you. Please understand that I was scared and worried and so scared of losing you. Third, she specifically told us in the very first interview she didn't want this child. She stated, I didn't really want to have my baby, but I couldn't get rid of it. So these are the very first pieces of the puzzle. The understanding that unquestionably she did not want that baby. The second piece of the puzzle then is that she looked for ways to get rid of the baby. And that makes sense. That follows naturally from the first pieces. If she knew that she didn't want the baby but couldn't get rid of it, she needs to start looking at ways. Is there anything I can do to get rid of it? And we know that she did that because she told the detectives that. She said she researched how to have an abortion without going to the doctor. She said she looked at ways and researched ways of how to get rid of a baby. And when the detective even asked her, like, so when you say that, and she's like, geez, that sounds really bad, doesn't it? Yeah, it does. And we know that she did it because she knew there were ways that she saw. She told the detective there was like, it gave you different things to do, and like different pills or different things to do, and like different ways, but I never did any of those things. Clearly, she looked up these things. All of those things don't just come up by typing in a search in Google. She had to go to the actual websites to see them. And we know then that she deleted the contents of her phone. You have to ask yourself, why would she do that? Why did she delete all of the searches? Why did she delete all of the text messages between her and Brandon and her and her mother? What was she so afraid of? The next piece of the puzzle relates to her fear to tell anyone that she was pregnant. She was told repeatedly by her doctor to tell someone about what was going on, but she was adamant that she could not. And so she kept this secret all to herself, feeling trapped and feeling isolated, and feeling so desperate that she started researching how to get rid of a baby. And she already knew what her mother's reaction was going to be. She knew that because her mom told her in a text message. When her mom thought she was pregnant, she said, "It would ruin your life. It would ruin your future." Think about what effect that has on someone who has an intense fear of disapproval from her mother. To go along with keeping her secret inside, the next piece of the puzzle relates to her planning and preparation for the child, which there was none. She never followed up with Hilltop OBGYN. She never started her prenatal care. She didn't look for anything for that baby. She didn't have a car seat. She didn't have a crib. She didn't have any of the things that you would expect an expectant mother to have. She didn't even have somebody lined up to take care of the child if she decided that she wanted to give it up for adoption. She had done nothing. Another big piece of the puzzle is the defendant's actions in the concealment and destruction of evidence after her daughter's birth. What do we know? First, we know that she buried the baby so that no one could do any testing on the child. What else do we know? She got rid of the towels and the mess. And what's interesting here is when her dad asked her about that, he says, "Did you throw it away at our house or someplace else?" And what was Brooke's response to him? It was someplace else. Why would you do that? That shows a level of thought and planning that you wouldn't expect from just a scared teenager that purportedly had a stillbirth. Additionally, she moved her bed to cover that large blood stain. And she doesn't move the bed until after her first interview with the police on July the 14th. Sometime after that interview, she moved her bed. And this movement of her bed directly covers a large blood stain with her DNA and a minor component of DNA from someone else. But there wasn't enough to test it. And you have to remember, where did Dr. Boyce say that Brooke first told her she delivered that baby? Dr. Boyce, when she was interviewed by Detective Carter 2 days after her appointment with the defendant, she acknowledged that she told the detective that Brooke told her she delivered in her bedroom. And look at the placement of the stain in relation to where her bed was at that time. And consider the picture that Deputy Smith said appeared to be a torso right on that spot on the floor. They can come in here all they want and say, well, she said cleaning fluid can also lighten up luminol. But what else do we know? What was conveniently left out of that from Amy Dallaire? She tested this. That swab, that area where it's lit up, it was tested. And it came back as blood. This wasn't cleaning supplies. This was specifically tested. And it came back as blood. And the DNA on it was Brooke Richardson's and a minor component that there wasn't enough to test. Next, we have her bloody footprints from going to the bedroom in the direction towards the bathroom. And why is that significant? Shows you that she's been lying about this from the very beginning. And if she made up her mind to lie about where the delivery occurred, you have to ask yourself why. Why would she make that up? And you have to then wonder whether you can trust anything that she says. Why lie about the location of the birth of your daughter if it was a stillborn? What would be another piece of the puzzle that you would want to look at? You'd want to look at her mood and feelings afterwards, wouldn't you? So first you have her reaction that she tried to show to the detectives, where she's crying and she's like, I loved her. I would never harm her. So that's one reaction that was presented to you today. But compare that to the text messages that she wrote before any police involvement in this case, back when she thought she got away with the whole thing. What does she say? I'm literally speechless with how happy I am. My belly is back, OMG. I'm never, ever, ever, ever letting it get like this again. You're about to see me looking freaking better than before, OMG. That was just hours after her daughter died. An hour after that text message comes another one. I'm literally so excited now just for dinner to wear something cute. Yay. My belly is back. Now I am taking this opportunity to make it amazing. The defense has tried to make this suggestion. She sends these kind of text messages all the time. That doesn't make any sense. What's her belly back from? She specifically says, my belly is back. Her belly is back because her child is no longer there. And she is thrilled about that fact. She then sends another text message to Brandon, same morning after her daughter's dead. I'll tell you about it later, but last night was like the worst ever, and I didn't go to sleep until 5:30. But I feel so much better this morning. I'm happy. One day later, after putting her daughter in the ground, she sends another text message. Great. I feel like a literal new person. I'm confident and happy. I have been strutting down every hallway, killing it, and have been thinking about how awesome I'm going to look this summer. Think about those texts. Which do you think more accurately reflects her feelings? The crocodile tears in the interrogation room when the police are talking to her about it, or the text messages when she thought she had gotten away with it? Which do you think is the better representation of her feelings at the time? Your Honor, can I ask you how much time I have?
You have until 10:47.
Okay, thank you. Another piece to the puzzle. She never told anyone about her child after its death. If it was truly a stillborn, why not tell your mother? If it was truly a stillborn, why not go to the doctor and get checked out and examined to make sure that you don't have any injuries or complications? The defense argues, well, she went back to the same practice. She was ready to disclose that day. She was ready to come clean. We know that's not the truth. She didn't go into that doctor's office wanting to disclose. She only said that when she was confronted. And even after she was confronted, she still told Dr. Boyce that she didn't want her mother to know. If it was up to the defendant, Dr. Boyce would have never called the police, and that child would still be 2 inches in the dirt back behind their home. So let's not all pretend that on July the 12th, she was ready to come clean and tell everyone and get this burden off her chest, because we know that's not true. So we have all of these pieces of the puzzle, and now the image is really starting to become clear, isn't it? What do we know? She didn't want it. She couldn't get rid of it. She researched ways to get rid of it. Never told anyone about it. Lied and concealed it. No preparations or planning for it. Upon having it, buried it in the backyard. Destroyed and disposed of any evidence of it. Was happy after it died. And never told her family about it after its death. And ladies and gentlemen, the reason I'm using it here as opposed to Brooke's daughter is because that is how Brooke described her daughter throughout the entire first interview. You'll have that. Go back and watch it. Every time she talked about her daughter, it was it. It wasn't until the second interview, after the police were involved, that all of a sudden her daughter had a name, and it was Annabelle. So when you have all of those pieces of the puzzle, you can see what's happening here. But we haven't even got to the final piece yet. The single most insightful piece of evidence in this case. And that's the 5 minutes leading up to her daughter's birth. She knew she was going to deliver. She told the detectives that, and she told Dr. Boyce that. She knew what was happening. She'd been having contractions since the Friday. And so what happens in the minutes leading up to her daughter's birth when she knows that baby is going to come out and she can't conceal it anymore? What does she do? Because this is how you know what her true intentions were. She didn't call 911. She didn't go to the hospital. She didn't wake up her parents. She didn't wake up her brother. So you have to ask yourself why. What would be the point of that? Of not requesting help at that point when you know you were giving birth. You are at that point, you know you can't conceal the baby anymore. And you don't still know at that point when she was getting ready to deliver, she doesn't know if she's going to deliver a live baby or not. You would think she would have to assume this baby's going to come out alive and it's going to start making noise. So why not get your parents? That's certainly better than knocking on the door and waking them up as you're holding this baby. And not only did Brooke not ask for help, but she committed herself to staying quiet during the entire labor process. Why? Why was she so motivated? And that was not my word. That was Dr. Boyce's word. When she talked about labor being a horrific process, she said you would have to be motivated to stay silent through it. So what was her motivation to stay so silent when she knew that she was going into labor? There's only one reason that you wouldn't ask for help at that point. Only one reason you would force yourself to give birth in silence. And that's because that child was never going to see the light of day. And that decision is confirmed when you look at her actions immediately following her birth. She's never delivered a baby before. She doesn't know what a baby's supposed to look like. So if this child came out not breathing, as Brooke would have you believe, why is she not trying to get it help? What mother doesn't think that they want to get help for their baby immediately upon her birth if she thinks something's wrong? Brooke's not a doctor. She has no medical training. This is someone who the defense contends didn't even know she was pregnant until 8 months. But now we are going to accept her medical opinion of a stillbirth? You have to be kidding me. Any mother in that situation, if they believe that their baby is in trouble, if they believe that their baby is in danger, would be begging for help. They would be screaming to anybody that would listen, please come help my daughter. That's if you truly wanted to save her. What does Brooke do? Nothing. She doesn't call for help. She doesn't wake her parents. She doesn't do anything. She doesn't even engage in any life-saving measures for the baby. She did nothing. And when you look at all of those pieces of the puzzle, ladies and gentlemen, you're able to see the big picture now. You're able to know exactly what happened in this case. The puzzle shows you exactly what happened. The evidence shows that she clearly murdered this child. There is no other explanation for all of her actions and inactions. But even if some of you are back in the jury room struggling about whether she purposely murdered her daughter, there is no question, none, that she is guilty of involuntary manslaughter and endangering children. There can be absolutely no excuse for not helping her daughter after that child was born alive. Even if you accept the argument that the child was in distress upon birth, everyone can agree that she should have tried to get that baby help. She should have called 911. She should have got her parents. She should have gotten medical assistance for the child. There can be no reason, no justification for just lying there and not lifting a single finger to help her. And this wasn't just a stranger to the child. This was her mother. And she didn't do anything. She medically diagnosed her as a stillborn and buried her in the backyard without telling anyone. At a bare minimum, this is endangering children and involuntary manslaughter. No question that she violated her duty of care, protection, and support to her daughter. But this was about more than just not getting her daughter assistance. This was about ending her daughter's life. Brooke's decision not to ask for help when she was going into labor and her motivation to remain quiet during the birthing process proves this child was never going to be allowed to live. She didn't just get lucky that a child that she didn't want, made no plans for, and told no one about, just happened to come out stillborn in the middle of the night under the cover of darkness. This is someone who actively researched how to get rid of a baby and then made it happen by killing her and burying her in the backyard. And now she comes to you when she's caught in her web of lies and deception, and she asks you to believe that this was all just luck. All of the stars didn't just align, ladies and gentlemen, for her to have a stillborn child that she didn't want, told no one about, made no preparations for, and concealed and buried her in the backyard, all so that she could maintain the appearance and the image of her perfect life. That's not reasonable doubt. That's not doubt based on reason and common sense. That's ridiculous. That would be holding us to a standard of proving this case to you beyond all possible doubt, which the judge will tell you is not the standard. It's beyond a reasonable doubt. And are you firmly convinced of the truth of the charge? And ladies and gentlemen, if you want to know how Brooke Richardson truly felt about her daughter, don't take it from me. Don't take it from Mr. Ritgers. You don't even have to look at the interrogation tapes. If you want to know how she truly felt about her daughter after just putting her in the ground, what was her reaction before she was ever charged, before she ever spoke with the police? Back when she thought she got away with everything, how did she feel? I'm literally speechless with how happy I am.